Orchestrated entirely new Western romance with fresh characters, setting, and redemption symbol. Orchestrated entirely new Western romance with fresh characters, setting, and redemption symbol. By the time Tamsen Reade brought the six-mule team down the grade into Talos Springs, the whole street had already decided what to think of her and had decided it years ago and was only watching now to confirm itself. She came in standing, the way she always drove the last quarter mile. One boot braced against the footboard, and the lines threaded through her fingers like she'd been born holding them. Dust rolled off the wheels in a slow curtain. The lead mule, a big raw-boned jack named Solomon, swung his ears at the sound of the town and kept his pace exactly, because Solomon had long since learned that the woman behind him did not panic, and so neither would he. The wagon was loaded to the bows with mining timber and a crate of window glass packed in straw that had not cracked once across 40 miles of bad road, and that, if anyone in Talos Springs had cared to notice, was the more remarkable fact. They did not care to notice. What they noticed was that the driver was a woman, and that she was good at a thing women were not supposed to be good at, and somewhere in the difference between those two observations, the town had built its opinion and moved in. Tamsen was 29 years old. She had been hauling freight on the Talos Springs route for 6 years, ever since the lung fever took her father in the back room of their little house at the edge of town and left her with his contracts, his teams, his debts, and his name on the side of the wagon. Ezra Reade had taught her the trade the way some men teach their sons, without much ceremony and without ever once saying out loud that a girl couldn't learn it. By the time she was grown, she could throw a diamond hitch in the dark, float a wheel off a hub with a green stick lever and no help, doctor a galled shoulder, and read weather off the western rim an hour before it broke. She could swear at a balky mule in a way that turned the air a particular color, and she did, because a mule responds to conviction and not to good manners, and Tamsen had learned early which one moved freight. The town held all of this against her, not openly. Talos Springs was not a cruel place, only a small one, and small places do their judging the slow way, in pieces, over years, the way water gets into a wall. A word here, a look there, the way the women at the dry goods store would go quiet and then too friendly when she came in, smelling of axle grease and mule. The way men who'd never moved 1,000 pounds in their lives would explain her own road to her, gravely, as if she'd come to it yesterday. By the time she was 29, the town had reached the verdict it had been drifting towards since she was a girl, which was that Tamsen Reade was a fine hand and a hard woman and no man's notion of a wife, and that whatever softness God put in most women had got left out of her somewhere, or worked out of her by the lines. Tamsen had her own opinion on the matter, which she kept mostly to herself and mostly to Solomon, who was a good listener and never argued. Her opinion was that she was not hard so much as plain, and that the town confused the two because it had never once been in a position to need her the way the freight route needed her. Out on the grade, alone, in the cold blue hour before dawn with a load and a bad stretch ahead, there was no one to find her to anything. There was only the work, and the work did not care about her hands. It was her hands, in the end, that the town had settled on. There was a story under the verdict, the way there usually is, and the story was this. When Tamsen was 19, the spring her father first started failing, a young man named Asa Pruitt had paid her attention for the better part of a season. He was the kind of handsome that a small town overrates, and he had a way of standing close and laughing low that she had not, at 19, learned to mistrust. She had let herself believe it. She had for one season walked home from church the long way, and at the harvest dance that fall, in the lamplit grange, with the fiddles going and the whole valley watching, she had crossed the floor to him in the one good dress she owned. And Asa Pruitt had looked at her hands, already rope-burned, already calloused hard from a summer of driving her father's lighter team, and had said, loud enough for the table behind him to hear, that he'd as soon dance with a man, that those weren't a girl's hands, that Tamsen Reade was more mule than woman, and somebody ought to tell her so before she made a fool of herself. The table had laughed. He had meant the table to laugh. and Tamsen had stood there for the length of one held breath, with the whole grange tilting. And then she had turned around and walked out into the dark and driven home, and she had not worn the good dress again, and she had not crossed a dance floor toward a man since. She told herself she had forgotten it. She had not forgotten it. There are some sentences a person carries their whole life, folded small and put away, and takes out only in the worst hours to confirm the thing they already feared. More mule than woman. Tamsen had taken it out a great many times over 10 years, and the cruel genius of it, the part Asa Pruitt could never have planned because he wasn't smart enough, was that the better she got at the work, the truer the town let the sentence become. Every wheel she pulled, every grade she walked the team down, every hundredweight she swung onto the bed alone, all of it, in the town's accounting, was proof. She had made herself indispensable to Tallow Springs and unmarriageable to it in the same 6 years and with the same 2 hands, and most days she'd have told you she preferred it that way. Most days. Not every day. If you have ever been good at a hard thing and lonely in the same breath, you know that the two do not cancel. They only take turns. The man who would change it came to Tallow Springs in March, on the stage, with a trunk of tools and a letter of agreement to take over the old Burl Tatum smithy, which had stood shut since Tatum died the winter before, and the town's wheels and shoes and broken iron had been going 40 miles to the railhead and back ever since. His name was Gideon Marsh. He was 34, a wheelwright by his first trade and a smith by his second, and he had come west from Ohio by way of a string of towns he didn't talk about much, looking, he said, when anyone asked, for a place that needed building more than it needed impressing. Tallow Springs qualified. He met Tamsen Reade on his 4th day in town, and he met her the way half the territory met her, which was over a broken wheel. She'd cracked a fellow on the downgrade above the salt flat, limped a load in on a bound wheel and a prayer, and brought the wagon to the smithy at first light, expecting to leave it a week and lose the money. Gideon was already at the forge. He came out wiping his hands and walked a slow circle around the wagon without saying anything, which she noticed because most men talked first and looked second. He crouched at the bad wheel. He set his thumb against the crack and pressed and watched how it moved and ran his palm down the spokes the way you'd run a hand down a horse's leg. "Cubs sound," he said, mostly to the wheel. "Fellows gone and the tires loose front and back. You drove it in on the bound wheel. 40 miles of it." He looked up at her then, the first proper look, and whatever he was checking for, he seemed to find it, because something in his face settled on the salt grade. Loaded. Loaded. And it held. He stood and dusted his knees and looked at the wheel again like it had told him something about her he wanted to confirm. That's a teamster's wheel. That's not luck. It was a small thing to say. It should not have done anything to her. But Tamsen Reade had spent 10 years being congratulated for the load and pitied for the woman. And not one man in those 10 years had looked at her work and called it skill to her face without a "for a woman" tucked somewhere in the sentence like a stone in a boot. She found she didn't have an answer ready. She gave him the one she had. "How long?" she said, "and how much?" Gideon told her 3 days. He was wrong. He had it sound and trued and back under her in 2. And he charged her fair, and when she came to collect it, he had it standing in the yard with the new fellow oiled, and the tire set so true, it rang when he tapped it with a knuckle. He tapped it for her on purpose. She understood later, the way you ring a glass to show its hole. She paid him. She climbed up. And before she clucked the team out of the yard, she said, not looking at him, because she was out of practice at looking at men while she said true things, "That's the best wheel's been under this wagon since my father set the last one." "Then I'll set the rest of them," Gideon said, "as they go." He could not have known what that did. He was only a man offering to keep her wheels. But there was a promise hidden inside it that Tamsen heard whether he'd meant it or not. As they go, meaning there'd be a next time, meaning he expected her to keep coming, meaning he'd already filed her into the part of his life that was going to have a length to it. She drove out onto the flat with the new wheel singing under the load and did not examine too closely why her chest felt the way it did. That was March. By the end of April, the smithy had become a place she stopped, whether a wheel was cracked or not. She told herself there were reasons. The forge was on the road out of town. She passed it anyway. He kept good water in the trough, and her mules liked it. He'd taken to having coffee on at the hours she usually came through, and it was better coffee than she made, which was not a high bar, but she said it anyway, and he laughed. And his laugh was a low, quiet thing that she found she drove all morning trying to earn. She would pull the team up in the yard, and Solomon would put his big head over the rail toward the water, and Gideon would come to the door wiping his hands, and they would talk. Not about much. The road, the weather coming off the rim, a wheel he was building for the Dunmore freight outfit, and how Royal Dunmore wanted it cheap and wanted it good, and was going to get one of the two. She found he listened the way he'd circled her wagon that first morning. All the way around a thing before he spoke on it. She found she could tell him about a bad grade in a near wreck, and he didn't reach for the reins of the story. Didn't tell her what she should have done, only asked her what she did do, and nodded when she told him, because what she'd done had been right. Tallow Springs noticed. Tallow Springs noticed everything, and a woman who didn't court being talked about got talked about twice as much for the silence. By the first week of May, it was known that the Reade woman watered at the marsh smithy more than the road required. By the second week, it was known they'd been seen on the bench outside the forge after dark. Not talking, just sitting, which a town finds more alarming than any amount of talk. And somewhere in there, the good people of Tallow Springs, out of what they'd have sworn was kindness, decided the new smith ought to be told. The one who told him was Hetty Pinder, who ran the dry goods and considered herself the keeper of the town's good sense. She came on a slow afternoon under the cover of buying a hinge, and she got around to it the way such women do. Sideways with a sigh. "You'll want to be careful there," she said, when Gideon set the hinge on the counterboard between them. He didn't pretend not to know. Careful of what? The Reade girl. Hetty lowered her voice for the kindness of it. "She's a good worker. I'll give her that. Nobody'll say she isn't. But she's hard, Mr. Marsh. She's not. She's been the way she is too long. There were men, you know, years back. It didn't take a woman like that can do without anybody. She does. You're new here. You wouldn't know to look at the work that the woman underneath it isn't." "Isn't what?" Gideon said. Hetty Pinder, who had not expected to be asked to finish the sentence, found she didn't want to out loud. "She's a lot," she said instead, which is what such sentences shrink to when somebody makes you hold them. "Most men can't manage her. That's all. I'd not see a decent man walk into it not knowing." Gideon Marsh picked up the hinge and turned it over once, checking the pin the way he checked everything. When he set it down, he looked at her with no heat in it at all, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. "Mrs. Pinder," he said, "I've shoed mules for that woman and true her wheels and watched her bring a load down the salt grade on a bound wheel that would have put a wreck in the wash and killed a lesser hand. I don't need managing her. I'd be lucky to keep up with her." He pushed the hinge across the board. 2 cents. "And I thank you for the worry. You can put it down now." The story of that ran the town by supper, because Hetty Pinder could no more sit on a thing than fly, and it ran in 2 directions at once, the way news does. To most of Tallow Springs, it was proof the new smith was a fool who'd been warned, but there were a few. A wife here and there who'd watched Tamsen Reade pull her own weight, and the towns for 6 years and had her own quiet thoughts about the verdict, to whom it sounded like something else. It sounded like the first time in 10 years a man had been handed the sentence, more mule than woman, dressed up in polite clothes, and had refused to wear it. You can tell a great deal about a town by which way a story like that runs in it. And you can tell a great deal about a man. It came to a head on a night in May, on the road the way the real things in Tamsen's life always seemed to, away from town and lamplight where there was no one to perform for. She was bringing the empty wagon back late off a long haul, later than she liked, with a half-moon up and the mules tired, when she lost a king-bolt on the rough mile above the wash and the front gear swung loose and the wagon nearly jackknifed in the dark. She got them stopped. She got down. And she stood in the road in the cold with a wagon she couldn't move and 12 miles between her and town, and knew exactly what she had to do, which was nothing until light. She'd done it before. She'd sleep in the bed of the wagon with the mules picketed and walk it in at dawn for the part. It was the work. The work didn't care that she was tired in a way that it stopped being about her arms. She heard the horse a long way off. She had the wheel iron in her hand before she could think about it, because a woman alone on a road learns young to be ready. And then the rider came into the moonlight, and it was Gideon Marsh on his gray, with a coil of rope and a sack of tools across the saddle, and she stood there in the road with the iron half raised and didn't know what to do with her face. "He'd come," he said, getting down because she hadn't come through by the hour she usually came through, and the wind was wrong off the rim, and a man got to thinking. He didn't make more of it than that. He didn't ask her if she was all right, which she'd have hated. He walked a slow circle around the wagon in the moonlight, the way he'd done the first morning, found the lost bolt's empty hole by feel, said King Bolt, and went to the sack for one, because of course he had one, because of ridden 12 miles into the dark on a guess and packed for it. They fixed it together in the moonlight, and it was the first time anyone had ever simply worked beside Tamsen Reade as an equal and a partner and not a curiosity. He held the gear up. She set the bolt. She knew the wagon, and he knew the iron, and between the two of them it took a quarter the time it would have taken her alone. And when it was done, they didn't get up right away. They sat on the tailgate with their legs hanging and the mules cropping the bunch grass and the moon laying the salt flat out silver to the rim. And Tamsen Reade said the thing she had carried folded small for 10 years, because the dark and the work and the man had finally made a place where it would come out. "There was a man," she said, "when I was 19. And she told him. The Grange, the fiddles, the good dress, the crossing of the floor. Asa Pruitt looking at her hands. More mule than woman. The table laughing. The long drive home. She told it flat, the way she'd long ago learned to tell it so it couldn't open her up again, and she kept her eyes on the silver flat the whole time and not on Gideon, because she did not want to watch a man hear it. He was quiet when she finished, long enough that she thought maybe she'd misjudged, maybe she'd handed it to the wrong man after all, and her stomach went cold the way it had gone cold in the Grange. Then Gideon Marsh reached over, slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and took one of her hands off her knee and turned it palm up in the moonlight. He looked at it a long moment, the calluses, the old rope scars, the strength of it. He didn't make it pretty. He didn't tell her it was soft, which would have been a lie, and she'd have known it. "This is the best hand in the territory," he said. "I've watched it work. There's not a man on the Dunmore line could do what this hand does." He closed her fingers gently back over her own palm, the way you'd hand someone back a thing of value. That boy looked at the best part of you and was too small to know what he was looking at. "That's not a thing wrong with your hands, Tamsen. That's a thing wrong with his eyes. The whole town's got the same trouble. They've been reading you backward for 10 years. She didn't say anything. She couldn't, just then. The Grange had tilted under her once, 10 years gone, and now in the cold dark on the salt road it tilted the other way, leveled, and set down somewhere new. "You don't know me that well," she said finally, which was the only defense she had left, and they both knew it. "I know you brought a load down the salt grade on a bound wheel and didn't lose the glass," Gideon said. "I know you swear at Solomon and he loves you for it. I know you walk every grade ahead of your team because you won't ride down a thing you'd not ask them to. I know you took your father's name and his debts and his road at 23, and you never once cried poor about it." He let go of her hand and looked back out at the flat. "I know you, Tamsen Reade, a sight better than a town that's known you 30 years. Knowing isn't time. It's attention. If you have ever waited 10 years for somebody to look at the truest part of you and not flinch, you will understand why she didn't answer him with words. She just leaned after a while until her shoulder came to rest against his in the dark, and let it stay there. And the man, wisely, said nothing more at all and let the moon do the rest. June came hot and dry, and with it the thing Gideon had been building in the back of the smithy on the nights she didn't come through, the thing he hadn't told her about because he wanted it whole before she saw it. He came for her on a Sunday morning, early, on foot, which was strange, and he walked her down to the smithy yard with his hand at her back and a look on his face she'd come to know, the still, pleased look he got when he'd done a thing right and was about to find out if it landed. And in the yard, standing on its new wheels in the early sun, was a freight wagon. Not her father's wagon, a new one, built from the axles up. Tamsen stopped at the gate and looked at it and didn't understand at first what she was looking at, because she had never in her life been given a thing she hadn't bought or built or earned by carrying. It was a beautiful piece of work. The running gear was true, the bed deep and braced, the bows set even. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. What stopped her breath was that the driver's box was wrong. And then she saw that it wasn't wrong. It was hers. The seat sat lower than a man's wagon and farther forward, set for her reach and not a tall man's. The brake lever fell exactly where her hand would fall for it. The footboard was braced for a driver who stood the last quarter mile, and there was a strip of iron set into it, just there, scored for grip, for a boot that braced in the same place every time. He had built a wagon to fit her, not a woman, her. He'd watched her drive for 3 months and built every measurement of that box around the way her own body did the work, and there was no part of it that said she was too tall, or too hard, or too anything to be wrought for. It said the opposite. It said the driver was the finest in the territory, and the wagon ought to honor that. "I couldn't fix what that boy did at the Grange," Gideon said, quiet behind her. "But I could build the one wagon in the territory that was made for the best hand in it." He nodded at the box. "Climb up. Take the lines. Tell me everywhere it's wrong, and I'll change it. It's built to fit you, and you're the only one knows whether it does." Tamsen Reade had not cried in front of another person since she was a girl. She did not cry now, quite though it was a near thing, and she'd have denied it under oath. She crossed the yard and she set her boot on the iron strip, which took her weight exactly, scored for it, and she swung up into the box, and the seat came up under her where a seat ought to come up, and never had, and the brake fell to her hand, and she gathered up the lines they'd run for her to test, and she sat there a foot higher than the yard, with the morning all around her, looking down at Gideon Marsh, who was looking up at her with that low, warm look, waiting to be told what to fix. "It fits," she said. Her voice did something it didn't usually do. "I know," he said. "I watched you for 3 months to make sure." And she started to laugh, the real laugh, the one the town had decided was too loud, the one she'd long ago stopped letting out where anyone could hear, and it came up out of her now in the smithy yard, bright as the new iron, and Gideon Marsh laughed with her, and Solomon over the rail swung his big ears at the sound and decided the way he decided all things, that whatever the woman thought of it must be fine. He asked her in July, out on the rim road at dawn, which was the place she loved best in the territory, and he knew it because he'd come to know what she loved. They'd driven the new wagon up empty in the cool dark, just to drive it, and they'd stopped at the place where the rim falls away and the whole salt country lies out below catching the first light, going from gray to rose to gold while you watch. And it is a thing that does not need saying over, and the two of them did not say over it. "I've been moving a long time," Gideon said when the flat had gone to gold. "Town to town, looking for the one I'd stop in." He was quiet a moment. "I knew it the morning I rang your wheel. It wasn't the town, it was you. I'd have followed you down whatever road you were on, Tamsen. I'd just as soon do it from beside you." She looked at him in the new light. The man who had ridden 12 miles into the dark on a guess, who had taken her ruined hand and called it the best in the territory and meant it, who had measured 3 months of her body's work and built her a place that fit, the thing she had stopped expecting, the thing she'd told herself she preferred to live without. It was sitting in the box beside her in the gold morning with sawdust still under his nails. "Gideon," she said. "Yes." "Ask me proper. I want to have been asked." So he asked her proper. And Tamsen Reade, who had walked off one dance floor 10 years before and sworn she'd not cross another toward a man, crossed the whole of it in one word, and the word was yes. They were married in September, in the Grange. She chose the Grange on purpose, and the town that knew her best understood why, and the few who'd had their quiet thoughts all along were glad. And Tamsen wore a good dress for the second time in her life and was not laughed at. Royal Dunmore, who'd lost his best hall contracts to a woman year after year and never forgiven it, came anyway, because a man in a small town comes to everything, and stood in the back with the look of someone recalculating. Hetty Pinder made the cake and told everyone within reach that she'd seen it coming, which surprised even her. And Asa Pruitt, who was 3 towns over now and twice married and gone soft and sour in the middle, was not there, being elsewhere, which was, as the saying goes, appropriate. There was a moment in it that the town talked about for a long while after. When the fiddles started up and it came time for the first dance, Tamsen Reade crossed the floor of the Grange, the same floor, the same lamplight, and she did not wait to be crossed to. She went to her husband and held out the hand that a boy had once refused at this very spot. Calloused and scarred and the best in the territory, and Gideon Marsh took it like it was the only thing in the room worth taking, and they danced. And the Grange, which had laughed at her once, did not laugh. It went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when it is watching something true, and then it did the other thing. The thing such towns do too late and never name out loud. It began, slowly, to be glad. She kept the freighting, of course. Competence runs into whatever room is open to it, and there was room, and she was the best on the route. She drove the new wagon for 30 years, the box that fit her, and the Reade name stayed on the side of it next to Marsh because Ezra Reade had hauled this country before there was a railhead to haul to, and his daughter saw no reason to take his name off a wagon just because she'd added one. Gideon kept her wheels true as they went, the way he'd promised the first morning before either of them knew it was a promise, and the town's opinion of Tamsen Reade revised itself the way small-town opinions do, without apology and without announcement. The old verdict quietly traded out for a new one until nobody could quite remember having held the first. She was. They came to Sazen now, and they said it now with the particular respect a place keeps for the one who turned out to be exactly what it needed and had nearly run off for being it. She was the finest hand in the territory, as she had always been. It only ever took one man with the eyes to see it and the wit to say, "Climb up and tell me where it's wrong." What stays with me about Tamsen Reade isn't the wagon, though I think about that wagon more than I'd admit. It's the 10 years between the dance and the dawn on the rim road and how she spent them. A boy looked at her hands one night in a lamplit Grange and said a cruel, small thing, and she could have done 2 things with it. She could have let it shrink her, quit the lines, married someone safe, gone soft and sorry to fit the size the town had cut for her. Or she could have kept driving. She kept driving. That's the whole thing, really. The cruelty came at her once, but the answer to it came from her every single morning for 10 years, in the cold blue hour before anyone was watching, when she walked a grade ahead of her team because she wouldn't ask a mule to take a road she wouldn't. I've come to believe that nothing in her life happened by accident, and that's the part worth sitting with. Asa Pruitt's words didn't make her hard. They made her decide, and the deciding, repeated long enough, became a kind of strength you can't fake and can't buy, the plain refusal to put a thing down just because carrying it costs you. That refusal is what built the best hand in the territory. Not luck, not a man, years of getting up and doing the right work the right way when it would have been easier to do less. And here's the cause and effect I can't get past. Gideon Marsh didn't fall for a woman who'd been waiting prettily to be rescued. He fell for what those 10 hard years had made. He watched her bring a load down a bad grade on a bound wheel, and he saw character because that's what skill under pressure actually is. It's who you've decided to be, showing up in your hands. He could build her a wagon that fit because she had first made herself into someone worth building for. The fit came last. The becoming came first. It always does. So when I think about what I want for the people I love, it isn't that the world go easy on them. It's that they have the honesty to keep their word to themselves on the days nobody's checking, the good sense to tell the difference between someone too small to see them and a flaw in their own self, and the backbone to keep walking the grade after they've been laughed off the floor. Those three things together are nearly everything. Tamsen crossed that Grange floor a second time 10 years later and held out the same hand a boy had refused. Same hand, same room. The only thing that had changed was that she'd spent a decade making it the best in the territory and had quietly decided she'd never again let a small man tell her what it was worth. The town called that fate. I call it the slow, unglamorous reward of a person who would not be made smaller.